The pen hovered millimeters above the billion-dollar contract. Julian Thorne, the titan of New York real estate, thought he was signing the deal that would save his empire. He didn't know he was signing his own death warrant. Across the room, amidst the clatter of silverware and the smell of cheap coffee, a waitress named Ella watched him. To Julian, she was invisible, just another uniform in a crowded diner. But Ella saw what no one else did. She saw the glint of malice in his partner's eye. She saw the trap. And in exactly 10 seconds, she would have to decide, stay silent and watch a king fall, or speak up and risk her own life. This is the story of how a spilled cup of coffee changed history. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Julian Thorne sat in the back booth of Sal's all-night diner, a place that smelled of bacon grease and lemon floor cleaner. It was a far cry from the mahogany boardrooms of Thorne Enterprises, but desperation had a way of changing a man's scenery. Julian was 38, with the kind of jawline that graced Forbes covers and eyes that usually held the steel resolve of a shark. Tonight, however, those eyes were bloodshot. He checked his Rolex, a Submariner that cost more than the diner's annual revenue. 11:45 p.m. "You're sweating, Julian," a voice purred from across the Formica table. Julian looked up. Marcus Vane sat opposite him, looking entirely out of place in a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost $5,000. Vane was the CEO of Chimera Capital, a hedge fund known for swallowing distressed companies and spitting out bones. "It's just the humidity, Marcus," Julian lied, gripping his coffee mug until his knuckles turned white. "Is the paperwork ready?" "Straight to business." "I always admired that about you." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The liquidity injection is ready. $500 million to cover Thorne Enterprises' short-term debt. In exchange, Chimera takes a 49% stake and 2 seats on the board." Julian swallowed a lump in his throat. It was a deal with the devil. Thorne Enterprises was bleeding cash after the South Seaport project collapsed due to unforeseen zoning issues. Issues Julian suspected Marcus had engineered, though he couldn't prove it. If he didn't sign tonight, the banks would foreclose by morning. His family legacy, built over 3 generations, would be auctioned off for scraps. "Let me see the papers," Julian demanded. Marcus snapped his fingers. A silent, hulking man named Silas placed a thick blue folder on the sticky table. 3 tables away, Ella Vance adjusted her apron. She was 26, with messy brown hair tied back in a utilitarian bun and shadows under her eyes that spoke of double shifts and insomnia. She wasn't just tired, she was exhausted in her bones. "More coffee, hon?" Ella asked an elderly trucker at the counter, pouring the pot with practiced stability. "Thanks, Ellie," the trucker grunted. Ella moved through the diner with the grace of a ghost. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive in the service industry was to be invisible. You heard things when people thought you weren't there. Secrets, affairs, crimes. She had been watching the 2 men in the back booth for an hour. She recognized Julian Thorne immediately. Everyone did. He was the city's golden boy. But she also recognized the man opposite him, not from the news, but from a life she had tried very hard to leave behind. Marcus Vane. Ella felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. 5 years ago, before she was a waitress scraping by on tips, Ella had been a junior paralegal at a boutique law firm in Chicago. That firm had imploded after getting tangled in one of Vane's shell companies. Ella had been the scapegoat. She had lost her license, her reputation, and her savings fighting a non-disclosure breach she didn't commit. She knew how Vane operated. He didn't make deals. He set traps. "Here is the signature page," Marcus said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the refrigerator. "Standard boilerplate. We need this done before midnight to clear the wire transfer." Ella wiped down a table adjacent to them, moving closer. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She just wanted to see. Julian put on his reading glasses. He flipped through the document. This looks standard." "Time is ticking, Julian," Marcus pressed, checking his own watch. 11:52 p.m. The wire window closes at 12 o'clock sharp. Ella's eyes narrowed. She watched Marcus's hand. It was resting on a second, thinner leather portfolio on the seat beside him. His fingers were tapping a rhythm against the leather. Tap, tap, drag. It was a nervous tick? No, it was a signal. Julian uncapped his fountain pen. The ink was black, permanent. He lowered the tip to the paper. Just sign right there, and your debts vanish. Marcus whispered, his voice like velvet over gravel. Ella looked at the document on the table. From her angle, upside down, she saw the header, Loan Agreement, Series A. Then she looked at the portfolio next to Marcus. It was slightly open. Inside, she saw the corner of a document with a red stamp. She squinted. The stamp didn't say loan agreement. It read, Transfer of Deed, Total Asset Liquidation. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was the Kansas City Shuffle. A classic con. Marcus had shown Julian the real contract. But Silas, the bodyguard, had performed a switch while Julian was wiping his glasses a moment ago. Ella had missed the switch, but she saw the result. The document Julian was reading now was a dummy copy, identical in the first few pages. But the signature page, that belonged to the document in the hidden portfolio, the one that would hand over 100% of Julian's company, not 49%. If Julian signed that page, he wouldn't be getting a loan. He would be signing away his entire life for $0. Don't get involved, a voice in her head screamed. You're just a waitress. You have rent to pay. If Vane recognizes you, you're dead. Julian the billionaire took a breath. He pressed the pen to the paper. Done, Julian whispered, starting the first loop of his signature. J. Ella didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just moved. She grabbed the pot of scalding hot coffee from her tray, pivoted on her heel, and tripped. Oh no! The scream tore through the diner's quiet atmosphere. Ella launched the pot forward. It wasn't a splash. It was a deluge. The dark, steaming liquid arced through the air and crashed directly onto the table, soaking the documents, the blue folder, and Julian Thorne's immaculate Italian suit. What the hell? Julian roared, jumping up as hot coffee seared his lap. My papers! Marcus shrieked, his composure shattering instantly. He lunged not for Julian, but for the soggy mess of pulp on the table. I am so sorry, Ella cried out, grabbing a stack of napkins and rushing in. She was chaotic, frantic, a whirlwind of apologies. I tripped. The floor is wet. Oh my God, I'm so clumsy. She aggressively began wiping the table, shoving her hands into the mess. Get away, you stupid cow, Marcus snarled, shoving her shoulder. Hey! Julian stepped in, his voice booming. Don't touch her. Even covered in coffee, Julian Thorne had an air of command. He looked at Ella, his eyes furious but controlled. You just ruined a $500 million contract. I'm sorry, sir, I can clean it up, Ella stammered, keeping her head down. But under the table her hand was working fast. In the chaos of the spill, the documents had turned translucent. The top page, the one Julian was about to sign, had soaked through. And because the paper was wet, the layer beneath it was visible. Look, Ella whispered. It was a single word, spoken with a drop of her old authority. It cut through Julian's anger. What? Julian snapped. Look at the paper, sir. Don't lift it. Just look. Julian paused. The waitress's voice had changed. The frantic, clumsy girl was gone. The tone was sharp, commanding. He looked down at the sodden mess. The ink from the top page was bleeding. The header loan agreement was dissolving, but the page underneath, which had been hidden by the top sheet, was printed on heavier waterproof bond paper, a trick used for permanent deeds. The watermarked text on the bottom sheet was clearly visible through the wet top page. Irrevocable transfer of ownership, Thorne Enterprises. The silence that descended on the table was heavier than the rain outside. Julian froze. He read the words again. Irrevocable transfer. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, Julian lifted his eyes to Marcus Vane. Marcus was no longer wiping his suit. He was standing perfectly still, his face pale, his eyes darting between Julian and the ruined papers. "You switched the signature page," Julian said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, like an earthquake starting deep underground. "You weren't buying 49%. You were stealing the whole company." "Don't be ridiculous," Marcus scoffed, though his voice cracked. "It's a standard clause." "There is nothing standard about a hidden deed transfer, Marcus." Julian slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. The bodyguard, Silas, took a step forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "I wouldn't," Ella said. She was standing at the end of the table. In her hand, she wasn't holding a napkin anymore. She was holding her phone, the camera lens pointed directly at them. "This is live streaming to the cloud," Ella lied, her voice steady. "Assaulting a billionaire is one thing. Assaulting a waitress on camera? That's 15 years minimum." Silas hesitated. He looked at Marcus. Marcus Vane straightened his jacket. The shark mask was back in place, but the arrogance was replaced by cold fury. He looked at Julian, then slowly turned his gaze to Ella. "You have no idea what you've just done," Marcus said softly to her. It was a threat, plain and simple. "I think she just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life," Julian interjected, stepping between Marcus and Ella. "Get out." "The deal is off, Julian. The banks come for you in the morning. You're finished." "I said get out." Marcus sneered. He grabbed his wet briefcase. "Enjoy the bankruptcy, Thorne." "And you—" He pointed a manicured finger at Ella. "Check your rearview mirror." Marcus and Silas stormed out of the diner, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully, a stark contrast to the tension left behind. Julian stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the crushing reality of his situation. He had avoided the trap, yes, but he still had no money. He was still ruined. He slumped back into the booth, ignoring the coffee soaking into his trousers. He put his head in his hands. "Sir?" Julian looked up. The waitress was standing there with a fresh pot of coffee and a dry towel. "Why did you do it?" Julian asked, studying her face properly for the first time. He saw the intelligence behind the fatigue. That wasn't an accident. Ella placed the towel on the table. "I used to be a forensic auditor. I know a blind stack when I see one. Vane's lawyer used to use that trick in Chicago." Julian stared at her. "A forensic auditor? Working at Sal's?" "Life happens," Ella said shortly. "I'm sorry about your suit." "My suit?" Julian let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You just saved my company from being stolen, but it doesn't matter. Without that money, I lose it all by 9 a.m. anyway." He looked defeated. The Titan was broken. Ella bit her lip. She should walk away. She had done enough. She had painted a target on her back for Marcus Vane. But looking at Julian, a man who had just been betrayed by someone he trusted, she felt a pang of empathy. "Maybe not," Ella said. Julian looked up. "What do you mean?" Ella pulled a small, crumpled notepad from her apron pocket. "I heard Vane on the phone in the hallway when he went to the restroom before you arrived. He was talking to someone named the Dutchman." Julian frowned. "The Dutchman? That's a myth. A black market financier." "He's real," Ella said, "and he's the one actually funding Vane's takeover. Vane isn't using his own money. He's over-leveraged. If the Dutchman finds out Vane tried to steal the deed instead of following the agreed contract, the Dutchman pulls the funding. And Vane's own empire collapses," Julian realized, his eyes widening. "But how does that help me?" "Because," Ella said, her eyes flashing with a sudden intensity, "I speak Dutch, and I memorized the number Vane dialed." Julian Thorne stared at the waitress. For the first time in months, he didn't see a dead end. He saw a path. "What is your name?" he asked. Ella Vance." Julian stood up. He extended his hand, ignoring the coffee stains. "Ella Vance, how would you like to make $10,000 tonight?" Ella looked at his hand. Then she looked at the door where Vane had exited. She took off her apron and threw it on the counter. "Mr. Thorne," she said, shaking his hand, "I think you're going to need to pay me a lot more than that." The heavy oak door of Sal's all-night diner slammed shut behind them, muting the sizzle of the grill and the hum of conversation. Outside, the Seattle rain had turned into a torrential downpour, blurring the streetlights into streaks of neon. Julian Thorne walked briskly toward a sleek black Aston Martin parked at the curb. It looked like a panther crouching in the dark. He unlocked it, the lights flashing amber, and looked back at Ella. She was shivering, hugging her cardigan tight against her chest, clutching the wet, coffee-stained documents in a plastic takeout bag she'd grabbed from the counter. "Get in," Julian ordered, opening the passenger door. Ella hesitated. "My car is around the back. A09 Corolla. It has a sticky clutch, but it's invisible. We need speed, not stealth. Vane will have eyes on the streets soon." Julian's voice was tight. "Get in the car, Ella." She slid into the leather bucket seat. It smelled of expensive cologne and new leather, a scent so sharp it made her head spin. Julian slid into the driver's side, throwing his wet jacket into the back. He started the engine, and the car roared to life with a guttural growl that vibrated in Ella's chest. "Okay," Julian said, peeling away from the curb. "Talk! Who is the Dutchman, and why do you know his number?" Ella buckled her seatbelt as Julian wove through traffic with terrifying precision. "Peter Vanderberg. They call him the Dutchman because he operates out of the port of Rotterdam, but his money is everywhere. He finances high-risk takeovers. He's legitimate, mostly. He hates fraud. It's bad for his reputation." "And the number?" "I have a photographic memory for numbers," Ella said quietly. "It's a curse, usually. But when Vane was in the hallway, I heard him reciting it to verify a transaction. He repeated it twice. 3165550198. Julian glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "You speak Dutch?" "My grandmother was from Utrecht. She taught me. It was our secret language." Ella stared out the window at the rain-slicked city. "I never thought I'd use it to save a billionaire." "You're not saving me yet," Julian muttered. He tapped the console screen. "Dialing!" The car's surround sound system trilled as the call connected. 1 ring. 2, 3. "Spreek!" A deep, gravelly voice answered. "Speak!" Ella took a breath. She leaned toward the dashboard. "Meneer Vanderberg," she began, her Dutch rusty but clear. "Ik bel namens Julian Thorne. Marcus Vane probeert u te bedriegen, Mr. Vanderberg. I am calling on behalf of Julian Thorne. Marcus Vane is trying to deceive you." There was a long silence on the line. Julian gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "English," the voice commanded. "Who is this?" "My name is Ella," she said, switching languages. "I have proof that Marcus Vane attempted to switch a loan agreement for a total asset liquidation deed tonight. He intends to take Thorne Enterprises for zero capital, effectively stealing your investment funds for his own pocket." A low chuckle resonated through the speakers. "Marcus is a shark. Sharks bite. This is not news." "He's not biting," Julian interjected, his voice authoritative. "He's stealing. The contract you authorized was for a 49% stake. If he takes 100% via a fraudulent deed, your legal standing as a primary investor is voided under U.S. racketeering laws. You won't own a piece of my company, Peter. You'll be an accessory to a felony. The SEC will freeze your assets in New York by morning." The silence returned, longer this time. Julian held his breath. He knew men like Vanderberg. They didn't care about morality. They cared about risk. "Proof," the Dutchman said. "I have the documents," Ella said, lifting the plastic bag. The coffee spill revealed the chemically treated bottom layer. The loan agreement washed away. The deed remained. "Bring it to me," Vanderberg ordered. "You're in Seattle?" Julian asked, surprised. "My yacht, the Vryheid, is docked at Pier 66. You have 1 hour. If you are not here by 1:30 a.m., I release the funds to Marcus, and you, Mr. Thorne, become a pauper." The line went dead. Julian checked the dashboard clock. 12:40 a.m. "Pier 66 is across town," Julian said, shifting gears. The engine whined as he accelerated. We can make it. Wait, Ella said, looking in the side mirror. Julian, slow down. We don't have time to slow down. No, listen to me. Ella turned in her seat, looking out the back window. That SUV behind us. The gray Land Rover. It's been turning with us for the last 4 blocks. Julian glanced at the rearview mirror. Twin headlights were keeping pace, cutting through the spray of rain. It's probably nothing, Julian said, though his heart rate spiked. He took a sharp right turn, the tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The Land Rover mimicked the move instantly, tires squealing in protest. It's not nothing, Ella said, her voice trembling slightly. It's Silas. Julian cursed. He slammed on the accelerator. The Aston Martin surged forward, pressing them back into their seats. Hold on! The chase began in the industrial district south of the stadium. The streets were empty, a maze of concrete warehouses and flickering street lamps. Julian was a good driver. He did track days in Monza for fun, but the roads were slick with oil and rain. And Silas, the man behind the wheel of the Land Rover, drove with the reckless abandon of someone who didn't own the car he was destroying. He's trying to ram us! Ella shouted as the massive grille of the SUV loomed in the rear window. Bam! The impact jolted the sports car, sending it skidding sideways. Julian fought the wheel, correcting the slide just inches from a concrete pylon. He wants to run us off the road, Julian gritted out. He can't let us reach the pier. If he wrecks us, he takes the documents, Ella realized. She clutched the plastic bag to her chest. Julian, take the alley on the left. That's a dead end. No, I used to deliver food down here. It cuts through to the lower viaduct. Go! Julian didn't argue. He yanked the wheel left. The Aston Martin bottomed out with a sickening scrape of metal on concrete as they shot into the narrow alley. It was tight. Garbage cans flew into the air as the car's mirrors grazed the brick walls. The Land Rover was too wide. It screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley, unable to follow. We lost him, Julian breathed, slowing down as they emerged onto the lower road beneath the highway. He'll double back, Ella said, scanning the dark streets. He knows where we're going. Vane knows the Dutchman is at the pier. He'll try to cut us off before we get to the marina. Julian looked at her. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, framing a face that was pale but fiercely determined. You're good at this, he said. Surviving? Ella gave a bitter laugh. Yeah, I've had practice. When Vane's lawyers came for me 5 years ago, they didn't chase me with cars. They chased me with paperwork, eviction notices, private investigators. I learned to look over my shoulder. Julian softened. I heard about what happened at the firm. I didn't know it was you. Why would you? I was just a name on a file. Collateral damage. She looked down at the coffee-stained papers. That's all people like Vane see. Collateral. And people like me? Julian asked quietly. Ella looked at him. Tonight, you're the victim. Tomorrow, who knows? But right now, we're on the same side. They merged onto the waterfront highway. The rain was easing up, but the fog was rolling in off the Puget Sound. We're 10 minutes out, Julian said. If we... Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A text message. It popped up on the dashboard screen. Unknown number. I know about the waitress. I know about her sister, Mia. Foster care is a fragile system, isn't it? Stop the car, Julian. Drop the papers. Or, the sister disappears. Ella read the screen. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. Mia, she whispered. Oh, God, Mia. Who is Mia? My little sister. She's 16. She's in a group home in Queen Anne. Ella grabbed Julian's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Stop the car! Julian, stop the car! Ella, it's a bluff. He can't get to her that fast. You don't know Vane, Ella screamed, tears springing to her eyes. He has people everywhere. He destroyed my life to save a buck. He'll kill my sister to save his empire. Stop the car! I'm giving him the papers. Julian slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the shoulder. The car idled, the engine purring nervously. Ella fumbled with the door handle. "I have to call her. I have to tell him to stop." "Ella, listen to me." Julian grabbed her shoulders, turning her to face him. "If you give him these papers, he wins. He takes my company. And do you think he'll leave you alone then? You're a witness, a liability. If he wins, you and your sister are never safe. He'll have the power to bury you forever." "He's going to hurt her," Ella sobbed. "Not if we end him tonight," Julian said, his eyes burning with intensity. "We have 20 minutes. If we get this to the Dutchman, Vane loses his funding. He loses his power. His network crumbles. That is the only way to keep Mia safe. We have to cut the head off the snake." Ella trembled. She looked at the text message again. Then she looked at the documents in her lap, the weapon that could destroy a monster. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "We need to make sure she's safe right now. Can you do that? You're a billionaire. Can't you call someone?" Julian nodded. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "I have a head of security, ex-Mossad. He's loyal to me, not the board." He put the phone to his ear. "Gideon, it's Thorne. I need a code red immediate extraction. Queen Anne District. A girl named Mia Vance. Get her out. Now. Use the helicopter if you have to. Take her to the safe house in the Cascades." He listened for a moment. "Yes, I'm sending you the address." He looked at Ella. "What's the address?" Ella gave it to him, her voice shaking. "Go," Julian commanded into the phone. He hung up. "Gideon is 5 minutes away. He's faster than any goon Vane can hire." Ella wiped her eyes. She looked at Julian, and for the first time she saw not just a rich man, but a man who was fighting for her. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go get the bastard." Julian floored the accelerator. They reached the marina at 1:25 a.m. The Vryheid was a monstrosity of a yacht, gleaming white under the harbor lights, 3 decks high. Julian parked the car at the gate. "We have to walk from here." "Security protocols." They got out into the cold sea air. The wind whipped Ella's hair across her face. They began to jog down the long concrete pier toward the yacht. They were halfway there when a figure stepped out from behind a stack of shipping crates. It was Silas. He wasn't holding a gun. That was too loud for the marina. He was holding a telescoping steel baton. He flicked his wrist, and it extended with a sharp clack. "End of the road," Silas grunted. He was huge, blocking the path like a boulder. Julian stopped, putting an arm out to shield Ella. "Silas, it's over. Vane is finished." "Not until I get that bag," Silas said, eyeing the plastic sack in Ella's hand. Julian took off his watch. He slipped it into his pocket. Then he took off his ruined suit jacket. "Ella," Julian said calmly, unbuttoning his cuffs. "Run to the yacht. Give the papers to the guard at the gangway." "What? No!" Ella cried. "He'll kill you." "I took boxing at Yale," Julian said with a tight smile. "I was actually pretty good." "This isn't a boxing match, Julian. He's a killer." "Run!" Julian shouted. He lunged at Silas. It was brave but foolish. Julian was fit, but Silas was a machine. Silas sidestepped Julian's jab and swung the baton. It connected with Julian's ribs with a sickening crunch. Julian groaned, falling to one knee. "Julian!" Ella screamed. "Go!" Julian gasped, tackling Silas around the legs. Ella didn't want to leave him. Every instinct told her to stay, but she knew Julian was buying her time. She turned and sprinted toward the yacht. Her sneakers slapped against the wet concrete. She could hear the sounds of the fight behind her. Grunts, the thud of fists, the crack of the baton. She didn't look back. She reached the gangway of the Vryheid. 2 massive security guards stood there, arms crossed. "I need to see Mr. Vanderberg," she gasped, doubling over, holding the bag up like a holy relic. "I have the proof." The guards didn't move. They looked past her. Ella turned around. 50 yards down the pier, Julian was on the ground. Silas was standing over him, raising the baton for a finishing blow to the head. "No!" Ella screamed. But then, a blinding spotlight from the top deck of the yacht snapped on. It flooded the pier with brilliance, freezing Silas in place. A voice boomed over a PA system. "That is enough." Silas squinted into the light, lowering his arm. From the top deck, A man in a silk robe leaned over the railing. He was smoking a cigar. "Bring the boy and the girl up," the Dutchman commanded. "And bring the brute, too. I dislike loose ends." The main salon of the Vryheid was quieter than a tomb and twice as cold. It was a space designed to intimidate. White leather sofas, glass tables that looked like frozen water, and a floor-to-ceiling aquarium filled with circling reef sharks. Ella shivered, water dripping from her hair onto the pristine white carpet. Beside her, Julian sat on the edge of a sofa, clutching his side. His face was gray with pain, a dark bruise already blooming along his jawline where Silas's baton had connected. Silas himself stood by the door, flanked by 2 armed security guards who looked like they were carved from granite. At the head of the room, sitting behind a desk made of reclaimed shipwreck wood, was Peter Vanderberg, the Dutchman. He was a small man, surprisingly. He wore a silk dressing gown over pajamas, and his skin was like parchment paper. But his eyes were sharp, blue, and utterly devoid of warmth. He was peeling an orange with a small silver knife, the zest curling away in a perfect, unbroken ribbon. "You have made a mess of my pier," Vanderberg said softly. His accent was thick, rolling the R's. "And you are bleeding on my furniture, Mr. Thorne." "Better blood than ink," Julian wheezed, sitting up straighter despite the pain. "Especially the kind of ink Marcus Vane uses." Vanderberg placed a slice of orange in his mouth and chewed slowly. He looked at Ella. "And this is the Valkyrie who speaks my language?" Ella stepped forward. She felt small in her wet diner uniform, smelling of stale coffee and rain, but she held the plastic bag like a shield. "I'm Ella Vance," she said, her voice steadying, "and I have the proof you asked for." She placed the bag on the glass desk. Vanderberg wiped his hands on a linen napkin and opened it. He pulled out the sodden mess of papers. The coffee had done its work. The top layer of the fraudulent contract was a translucent mush, revealing the heavy bond paper beneath. He adjusted a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles and peered at the text. "Irrevocable transfer," he read aloud. He hummed, a sound that could have been amusement or anger. "Crude. Effective, but crude." "He was going to steal your capital," Julian said. "He would have used your $500 million to pay off his own debts, taken my company for free, and left you holding a bag of lawsuits when the SEC realized the transfer was fraudulent." Vanderberg looked at Silas. "Is this true?" Silas remained silent, staring straight ahead. He knew the rules. You don't talk to the money men. "He won't talk," Ella said. "He's just the muscle. You need Vane." "Oh, Marcus is coming," Vanderberg said calmly. He tapped a button on his desk phone. "He is already on his way. He believes he is coming to collect his wire transfer. He does not know you are here." Julian looked at the Dutchman. "You're setting a trap." "I am conducting an audit," Vanderberg corrected. "I dislike volatility. Marcus promised me a clean acquisition. This," he gestured to Julian's bruised face and the wet papers, "is not clean." Suddenly, Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with a grimace. "It's Gideon," Julian said, looking at the screen. He put it on speaker. "Report." "She's safe, boss," Gideon's voice crackled through the quiet room. "We extracted the sister Mia Vance from the group home 3 minutes ago. 2 hostiles in a sedan were watching the place, but they backed off when they saw our team. She's in the chopper. We're heading to the Cascades." Ella let out a sob she had been holding back for an hour. Her knees buckled and she grabbed the back of the sofa to stay upright. Mia was safe. The leverage Vane had over her was gone. Julian nodded at Ella, a look of profound relief in his eyes. "Good work, Gideon. Lock it down." He hung up. The tension in the room shifted. They were no longer running. They were waiting. 10 minutes later, the heavy mahogany doors of the salon swung open. Marcus Vane strode in. He looked immaculate, having evidently changed his suit since the diner incident. He was smiling, a predator sensing a kill. "Peter," Marcus boomed, extending his hand. "My apologies for the late hour, but business waits for no." He stopped dead. He saw Julian, battered but alive. He saw Ella, staring at him with cold hatred. And he saw Silas, disarmed and guarded in the corner. The smile didn't just fade from Marcus's face. It evaporated. "What is this?" Marcus whispered. "A reunion," Vanderberg said pleasantly. He didn't stand up. "Come in, Marcus." "Sit down. We were just discussing the finer points of contract law." Marcus looked around the room, his mind racing. He saw the wet papers on the desk. He realized with a dawning horror that the game had changed. But Marcus Vane was a narcissist. He couldn't conceive of losing. Not to a boy who inherited his money and a waitress who served coffee. "Peter, surely you aren't listening to these people," Marcus said, recovering his composure with terrifying speed. He smoothed his tie. "Thorne is desperate. He's bankrupt. He's concocting conspiracy theories to delay the inevitable." "Conspiracy theories?" Julian rasped. "We have the deed, Marcus, the one you hid under the loan agreement." Marcus laughed. It was a dismissive, ugly sound. "A forgery! Fabricated by this woman. She's a disgruntled ex-employee of a firm I worked with years ago. She has a vendetta. She spilled coffee on the papers on purpose to destroy the originals and swap them with fakes she printed in the back office." He turned to the Dutchman, his eyes pleading with practiced sincerity. "Peter, think about it. Who is more reliable? Me, your partner of 10 years? Or a waitress with a criminal record for breaking NDAs?" Ella felt the blood rush to her face. It was the same lie he had told 5 years ago, the same twist to the knife. Vanderberg looked at Ella. "He makes a compelling point, Ms. Vance. Paper is just paper. It can be printed by anyone. Can you prove this document came from him and not you?" The room went silent. Julian looked at Ella, worry etching his forehead. They hadn't thought of this. Vane was gaslighting them in real time. Ella looked at the document on the desk. She looked at Marcus, who was smirking. She closed her eyes for a second, accessing the part of her brain that used to hunt for discrepancies in million-line spreadsheets. She thought about the paper, the ink, the stamp. Then her eyes snapped open. "The notary stamp," she said. Marcus rolled his eyes. "Standard stamp. Means nothing." "No," Ella said, walking to the desk. "Not the stamp itself. The impression." She pointed to the wet, soggy mess of the top page, the decoy loan agreement. Then she pointed to the deed beneath it. "Marcus," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "When you sat in the diner, you had the papers stacked, the loan agreement on top, the deed hidden underneath, right?" "I had no deed," Marcus spat. "If you had no deed," Ella said, looking at the Dutchman, "then why is there a physical indentation of your signature on the deed?" Marcus blinked. "Pen pressure," Ella explained, turning to Vanderberg. "When Julian signed the top page, the loan agreement, he pressed down hard. If the deed was truly hidden directly underneath it at the moment of signing, as I claim, the pressure of the pen would have left a microscopic indentation of Julian's signature on the deed's paper fibers." She looked at Marcus. "But if I forged it later, as you claim, and swapped it in, there would be no indentation, because the papers wouldn't have been stacked when Julian wrote on them." Ella reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She turned on the flashlight and held it low against the surface of the deed, creating a raking light. There, ghosted into the grain of the heavy bond paper, were the faint embossed loops of Julian's signature. J. "He only wrote the J before I spilled the coffee," Ella whispered. "And there it is, pressed into the deed, which proves the deed was under his pen at 11:55 p.m. She looked up at Marcus. "Checkmate." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus Vane stared at the illuminated paper. The ghostly indentation of the letter J was undeniable. It was a forensic detail so small, so specific, that no amount of lying could talk it away. Vanderberg leaned forward, inspecting the indentation. He nodded slowly. "Physics," the Dutchman murmured. "Hard to bribe physics." He looked up at Marcus. The amusement was gone from his face. Now there was only the cold, dead stare of a shark that had found blood in the water. "You tried to use my money to facilitate a theft, Marcus," Vanderberg said. "You treated me like a fool. You thought I was just a wallet." "Peter, please," Marcus stammered, backing away. The arrogance was melting like wax. "I can explain. It was a hedge, a security measure. I was going to cut you in on the full ownership." "You were going to cut my throat," Vanderberg corrected. He picked up his phone. "Captain, we have a stowaway. Please invite the authorities to board." "No," Marcus shouted. He panicked. With the cornered desperation of a rat, Marcus Vane lunged. Not at the Dutchman. He was too far away. Not at Julian. He was too big. He lunged at Ella. He grabbed a silver letter opener from a side table and scrambled toward her, his eyes wild. "I'll kill you! You ruined everything!" "Ella!" Julian roared. Julian tried to rise, but his ribs screamed in protest, slowing him down. Ella didn't scream. She didn't run. She had spent 5 years being the victim, 5 years running from the shadow of this man. She was done running. As Marcus swung the dull blade clumsily, Ella sidestepped. It was a move she had learned dodging drunk patrons at the diner for years. She grabbed his wrist with both hands, using his own momentum against him, and twisted. Crack! Marcus screamed as his wrist snapped. Ideally, she would have thrown him, but she wasn't a fighter. She just tripped him. Marcus Vane, the titan of Wall Street, fell face first onto the white carpet. Before he could scramble up, a heavy boot landed on his back. It was Julian. Ignoring the agony in his ribs, he stood over Marcus, pressing him into the floor. "Stay down," Julian growled. The doors burst open. 4 Seattle police officers, accompanied by 2 men in FBI windbreakers, swarmed the room. They had been waiting on the dock, summoned by the Dutchman's security team the moment the yacht went into lockdown. "Marcus Vane!" an FBI agent shouted. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, racketeering, and attempted grand larceny." They hauled Marcus up. He was weeping now, a pathetic, broken figure. As they dragged him past Ella, he looked at her one last time. There was no threat in his eyes anymore, just shock. He couldn't understand how a waitress had toppled a king. "Who are you?" he whispered. Ella straightened her spine. She looked him in the eye. "I'm the collateral damage," she said. The doors closed. Marcus Vane was gone. The room fell quiet again. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving Ella trembling. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the sofa. "Here," a voice said. Julian was there. He handed her a glass of amber liquid, brandy. "Drink," he said gently. "It helps with the shock." Ella took a sip. It burned, but it grounded her. She looked at Julian. He looked terrible, shirt torn, face bruised, soaking wet, but he was smiling. "We did it," he said. "We did," she whispered. Then she remembered. "But, Julian, the deadline. It's 2 a.m. You missed the wire window. You didn't get the loan." She looked at the clock on the wall. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They had beaten Vane, but Thorne Enterprises was still bankrupt. The banks would foreclose in the morning. Julian had saved her sister, but he had lost his company. "I'm so sorry," Ella said, tears welling up again. "We were too late." "Not necessarily," the Dutchman spoke up. He was still peeling a second orange. He looked unbothered by the violence that had just occurred in his salon. "Mr. Thorne," Vanderberg said, "I still have $500 million sitting in an escrow account, and I suddenly find myself without a partner to invest it with." Julian turned slowly to face him. "I am not a charity, Mr. Thorne," Vanderberg said, popping a segment of orange into his mouth. "I do not give loans to bankrupt companies. However," he picked up a new folder from his desk, "I have been reading your portfolio on the South Seaport project, the one Vane sabotaged. The zoning issues are solvable, are they not?" "Yes," Julian said, his business mind snapping back into focus. "With the right capital, I can have the permits cleared in 3 months. The project is viable. It's a gold mine." "Then I propose a new deal," Vanderberg said. "I will not loan you the money. I will buy 40% of Thorne Enterprises directly. Equity partnership. No debt. No Vane. Just you and me." Julian stared at him. It was a better deal than Vane had ever offered. It would save the company and secure its future for decades. "Why?" Julian asked. "Because," Vanderberg pointed a long finger at Ella, "you have excellent taste in personnel." A CEO who listens to the waitress is a CEO who sees what others miss. That is the kind of man I do business with. He slid the folder across the desk. Do we have an accord? Julian looked at the folder, then at Ella. She gave him a tired, watery smile and nodded. Julian walked to the desk. He didn't hesitate this time. He picked up the pen, a heavy gold fountain pen belonging to the Dutchman, and signed. Done, Julian said. Good, Vanderberg said, closing the folder. Now get off my boat. You are dripping on my carpet. The morning sun over Seattle was blinding, a sharp contrast to the stormy darkness of the night on the pier. But for Ella Vance, the real storm had finally broken inside the sterile conference room of the federal building. It had been 3 weeks since the incident. Ella sat across from 3 SEC attorneys, her hands clasped on the mahogany table. Ms. Vance, the lead attorney said, closing a thick file. With your recording and the forensic evidence regarding the signature indentation, the case is airtight. Marcus Vane has been denied bail. We are seizing his assets to pay restitution to his victims. The door opened, and Julian Thorne walked in. He moved with a slight stiffness from his healing ribs, but his eyes were bright. He sat beside Ella, sliding a piece of paper toward her. We also found the files on Vane's private server, Julian said softly. Proof that he framed you 5 years ago to cover his own embezzlement. You're vindicated, Ella. Your CPA and legal licenses are being reinstated effective immediately. Ella felt the air leave her lungs. 5 years of shame, of hiding, of being just a waitress. It was over. She was free. They walked out of the courthouse together into the crisp afternoon air. Paparazzi shouted questions about the waitress who saved Wall Street. But Julian guided her swiftly into his waiting silver Bentley. Where are we going? Ella asked as the door thudded shut. I have a shift at Sal's at 4. I need to give my notice. You're not going to Sal's, Julian said, signaling the driver. And you're not giving notice. I bought the diner this morning. Ella stared at him. You bought Sal's? I gave Sal a very generous retirement package. He's moving to Florida. Julian smirked. But you're not going back to pouring coffee. The car wove through the city, heading north to the wealthy district of Queen Anne. They pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the St. Jude Academy for Girls. Julian, Ella warned, her heart racing. This is the most expensive school in the state. I know, I'm on the board. They stepped out. Sitting on a bench near the fountain was a teenage girl with messy brown hair. Mia! Ella cried out. Her sister dropped her book and ran, colliding with Ella in a fierce hug. Mia looked healthy, safe, and for the first time in years, like a normal child. Elle! Mr. Thorne said I can stay until I graduate. He paid the tuition in full. Ella turned to Julian, tears in her eyes. You didn't have to do this. I can't repay you. I'm not asking for repayment, Julian said, his expression turning serious. I'm asking for a partner. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. My CFO resigned this morning. I need someone I can trust. Someone who can spot the traps before I walk into them. Ella opened the envelope. The title read, Chief Financial Officer, Thorne Enterprises. The salary listed was enough to buy a house, a real home for her and Mia. I haven't practiced in 5 years, Julian. I'm rusty. You took down Marcus Vane with a pot of decaf and a flashlight, Julian said. You're not rusty. You're dangerous. And I want you on my side. Ella looked at Mia, who was giving her a double thumbs up. She looked at the contract, then at the man who had treated her like an equal when the world treated her like a servant. I demand one condition, Ella said, a smile breaking through her tears. Name it. No more meetings in diners. Julian laughed, a genuine, happy sound. Deal. 1 year later, the South Seaport Tower was no longer a blueprint. It was a shimmering needle of glass piercing the Seattle skyline. Inside the penthouse ballroom, the grand opening gala was in full swing. Julian Thorne stood on the balcony, adjusting his tuxedo cuffs. Beside him, Peter Vanderberg sipped champagne. "Stop checking your watch, Julian," the Dutchman chuckled. "You face down a federal indictment with a slower pulse than this." "I'm not nervous," Julian lied. "You are, but don't worry. She is here." The ballroom went quiet. Ella Vance stood at the top of the grand staircase. She was unrecognizable from the waitress in the stained apron, wearing a deep emerald gown that flowed like liquid. She didn't just look like a guest. She looked like the owner, which, as the CFO of Thorne Enterprises, she technically was. She descended the stairs, nodding to senators and CEOs with the confidence of a woman who had rebuilt an empire. She joined them on the balcony. "Sorry I'm late," she smiled. "Tokyo markets are volatile." "Always working," Vanderberg nodded approvingly. "I will leave you too. The caviar is calling my name." The Dutchman vanished into the crowd, leaving them alone against the backdrop of the city lights. "It's been a crazy year," Ella said softly, leaning against the railing. "Mia is safe at the academy. The stock is at an all-time high. And Vane was sentenced yesterday. Life without parole. It feels like a dream," Julian said. He took her hand. "But it's not. You built this, Ella. None of this stands without you." He turned her to face him. The noise of the party seemed to fade away. "When I met you, I was signing away my life," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had money, but I was alone. You didn't just save my company, Ella. You saved me." The crowd inside pressed against the glass doors, sensing the moment. Julian Thorne, the man who never bowed to anyone, dropped to one knee. He opened a velvet box. Inside sat a rare, deep blue sapphire. "It matches the ink on the contract you saved." He smiled nervously. "Ella Vance, I don't want to just be your business partner anymore. Will you marry me?" Ella looked at the ring, then at the man who had pulled her out of the shadows. Tears streamed down her face, but she was laughing. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him up. "Yes." Julian kissed her, and the ballroom erupted in applause. High above the city, the waitress and the billionaire held on to each other. They had lost everything to find each other, and in the end, it was the best deal either of them had ever made. What a ride! From a spilled cup of coffee to a billion-dollar empire, Ella and Julian proved that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. Julian thought he was just getting a refill, but he got a second chance at life. And Ella? She showed the world that you should never judge someone by their uniform, because the person serving your table might just be the smartest person in the room. It makes you wonder, how many opportunities walk past us every day just because we aren't looking? Would you have had the courage to spill that coffee? If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. And let me know in the comments, what's the biggest risk you've ever taken that paid off? I'll be reading your answers. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.